But I know that some of the folks I'm seeing in the room here submitted some questions. And so we're going to start with some of those submitted questions as the starting point, because we want to reward those people that submitted questions and that showed up live. And so we want to get to those ones first. And the first one we have is actually from someone that I know is in the room because I saw them join. This question came in from Kelly, and it was about data policies. And so I would love, Kelly, for you to type in the chat box a little more clarification on what you're looking for here. We're going to start answering the question on what we think you might be looking for. But if you want to add a little more clarification in the chat box, we can do that as well. So her question was, what data policies and procedures should be in place as your organization is getting started with Salesforce to protect your data? Great job thinking about that. I mean, just step number one is just that's a thought of yours is actually good. Is there somewhere to find standard policies and best practices? And I'll kind of start with this one, and then I'll throw it over to Ryan here in a second. So the first thing, whenever a client comes to me, so I've also done web development, I've done online fundraising, I've done other stuff. And whenever they come to me asking me for policies or procedures or stuff like that around social media, it doesn't matter. I always say start with folks in your industry, because each or segment of nonprofits, right? Every segment of nonprofits can be a little bit different and have some unique challenges when it comes to privacy and protection and data. So if you're a medical organization, you've got HIPAA compliance, and that is a whole other beast that, if you're dealing with working with children, that's a whole other thing to do with data privacy. And you have, what's the under 13 online profile law, COPA compliance. You got COPA compliance if you're dealing with children under 13. So I always say start with folks in your industry. You can go to organizations like NTEN, ask in the community forums there for other organizations similar to yours. You can search, or you just know colleagues that are in the same place and ask them what they're doing for their data policies and procedures and all that stuff, and how do you protect it. And from there, I know Ryan has some specific suggestions when it comes to Salesforce, and so I'll kind of hand that over to him.
Yeah, thank you. One of the kind of starting points that we always look at with our clients is, how are your users, how are people accessing your data? And a lot of organizations have, multiple different types of profiles or permission sets, some rules that, hey, these people can access this and not this, as well as some organizations just let everybody be a system administrator. And what we oftentimes find is that, that everybody is a system administrator approach is ripe for problems, either just, being able to tinker with the system, or being able to access data, or deleting data, I think is a big thing. So we typically start with, saying, okay, let's make some different profiles or permission sets that align with those job roles, the different roles that people who access Salesforce need to do. And we'll kind of set up a base one, and we'll say, okay, here's the bare minimum of access, standard user, and we'll set that up. And then we will have multiple profiles tailored to those job functions. For example, we have a lot of clients who are using Salesforce for both fundraising and programs. And usually the fundraising folks want to make sure that, their relationship data, especially with major donors, is somewhat private, right? Not the whole organization can necessarily access that, but also people managing programs don't necessarily need to access that information. Again, every organization's different, but in this case, being able to say, hey, these users over in programs and these users over in development, they both are able to access their work, do their work at the level they need, and not risk mucking up anybody else's work. One of the things that we also always recommend is suppressing the ability for people to delete data. And if they need to delete something, there are certain situations where it's like, okay, great, let's escalate that. You might have a manager of a group also have delete permissions, but making sure that that's careful is super important. One of our consultants on staff, Jeff, is a big proponent of kind of an approval process for new users as well, so that there may be multiple system administrators, but we want to make sure that like two people are approving a new user so that we're getting them the right permissions as well as just making sure that, yes, we want to pay for this user if we're beyond the 10 free licenses, but also from a security standpoint, checks, balances. And we've set up processes like that a lot of times.
Yep. I like that. And Kelly did talk in the chat here. So we use Salesforce, but we don't have any documentation to ensure consistency and ethical practices. I think that's key. We've had it for 10 years without any documentation. Everyone is just doing their own thing, and it's likely some staff have permissions that they should, maybe not, and lots of admins, and that's very common.
Yeah, that is very common. In fact, I was speaking with one of our other consultants, Deborah, about this recently. And one of the things that we are championing right now is kind of the base level of what's in your system. Where are you guys using data? Which objects? How are things being entered? And then figuring out the processes for that. So not even getting into customizations, right? Just kind of trying to figure out what's already in here. And sometimes you can do that yourself, and sometimes you might need help doing that and kind of uncovering all of those rocks and figuring out what's underneath. But putting that into a spreadsheet or a series of documents that just say, here's where things are, here's how we access these things, here's these job functions and these processes. And that can take time. And, you can spend all the time in the world on doing that. But the number one thing is just making sure you know how Salesforce is being used, so that when you work with somebody else or onboard a new staff member, you can more easily say, okay, here are the things that you're going to be accessing probably. And then, you can also make each individual department or user start to become responsible for, documenting their processes as well. And, that's definitely something you have to kind of look at that and say, okay, this is going to be an annual initiative for us where we're going to set out and try to start this. And some of the things that we do at Tackle are, range, but starting with that base is something we're really good at helping with. And then, of course, developing new processes, and third, figuring out what your processes are. But that third one in particular is, we actually don't know what your processes are. We can ask you questions. We can help provide you with questions to ask so that you can document them. But going through that process of just kind of thinking, how does our org work, and then writing it down, that can feel overwhelming, I'm sure, but take it one step at a time. It doesn't all have to happen now. Just pick something and write that one down.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing battle, right? It's something you're always revisiting and always coming back to. And there's ways you can really help, especially with that consistency. So I know, we work with a lot of clients who, instead of having a fill in the blank field for a piece of data, having a pick list instead. Yeah. So then you're getting consistent data across, because people are selecting it from a drop down list instead of, because someone might call it, offline, someone might call it, a totally different word. And then how do you reconcile that, right? If it's a fill in the blank field. And so using pick lists, things like that. So I think it's something you work on an ongoing basis, and that is something good to work with a consultant with as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely. And there may be some other related questions here that actually will relate back to this. So as we think about that, I'll try to point that out as well.